Major funding for the following program was provided by the Gilbert M. and Martha H. Hitchcock Foundation. Additional support was provided by the Nebraska Humanities Council.
In May of 2000, 70 American Jews, Christians, and Muslims spent 2 weeks in Morocco. They were part of a multi-year project studying the interaction of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in America. This predominantly Islamic country has a rich history, which has seen Muslims coexist and interact with Christians and Jews for more than a millennium. As the most religiously pluralistic country in the world, with identifiable faiths from around the globe, the United States cannot afford to ignore history. Morocco's past would hopefully prove insightful about America's multi-religious future.
Morocco was one of those unique places that still has Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together in a relationship that had been in existence for over 1,000 years.
I feel like I've changed internally. I feel that, if anything, I'm reaffirmed in my conviction that there is a God and that God is all merciful and that we are His children.
It has great mystique, fascinating. You leave with more questions than answers, which is good.
Coming from Omaha, Nebraska, I have to admit that I've really never known personally any Muslims. And it's just talking to them, as well as all of the other people on the trip, has been such an eye-opener. Everyone has been open and sharing.
I have been able to communicate with people and to be accepted by people, not knowing what they believe about the Quran, about the Jewish experience or Christianity.
I've never met a group of people who were knowledgeable in their own faith, but curious about other people's traditions and real respect for difference.
We found out, of course, that there are more similarities, and this is the important thing, more similarities between those three religions, or among those three religions, than differences.
To create your own mini global village out of this tour, to have that work in itself was one of the great miracles.
Morocco provided the diverse group of Americans with a unique setting in which to study the history and traditions of each other's faiths. As Jews, Christians, and Muslims, what they discovered about the other religions added insight to their unfolding journey. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace their roots back more than 4,000 years to Abraham. Through one of his sons, Isaac, Judaism was born. 2,000 years later, Christianity began from these same bloodlines. In the 7th century came Muhammad, the key prophet of Islam. He was a descendant from Abraham's other son, Ishmael. Known as the Abrahamic religions because of their common lineage, all three faiths recognize Abraham for his willingness to sacrifice his child. God's intervention at the last moment demonstrated the covenant he had with Abraham. These three faiths share many core beliefs. They all profess to worship one God, the God of Abraham. Islam, the youngest of the three religions, recognizes Jewish and Christian figures that predate the Quran. There is also Muslim acknowledgement of Jewish and Christian scriptures, such as the Ten Commandments given to Moses, the Psalms of David, and the Gospels of Jesus. Similarities among Judaism, Christianity, and Islam may be numerous, but theological differences are definite. Followers of all three faiths each believe theirs holds the ultimate truth about God's designs for humankind. The belief that God communicated through prophets is universal, but only Christians accept that he took human form. Unfortunately, the differences have affected their views of each other more than the commonalities. Centuries of distrust, strife, and conflict have been the result. More than 1,000 years ago, this was manifested in the Crusades. In the late 15th century, the Spanish Inquisition deepened the divide. That divide remains today. Differences between and even within these faiths continue to prevent them from coexisting peacefully.
You look around the world and you see what's happened in many multi-religious societies, like Bosnia. Most people don't understand that places like Northern Ireland and places of Africa and places in the Middle East that are filled with people who come from multi-religious backgrounds and have been unable, for a variety of historical reasons, to come to any consensus on how to live together.
Allahu Akbar.
American Muslims, like these observing the annual Hajj celebration in Omaha, have surpassed Jews as the largest religious minority in the United States.
As
the American community becomes more aware of the fact that it does have new neighbors and needs to know something more about them, there will be increased efforts at the dissemination of appropriate information about Muslims, and that is certainly already happening.
Multi-religious dialogue is not a new concept. In the greater Hartford, Connecticut area, 2 institutions have been deeply involved in interfaith activities for many years. Hartford Seminary's Duncan Black MacDonald Center for the Study of Islam and Christian-Muslim Relations continues the tradition of multi-religious programs and activities that began more than a century ago. In 1894, Duncan Black MacDonald joined the faculty of the seminary. He was dedicated to the scholarly and religious study of Christianity and Islam. Today, the center that bears his name continues the tradition of multi-religious programs and activities he started more than 100 years ago.
The seminary has been involved in interreligious dialogue for a long time. It grows out of its history as a traditional Protestant seminary, Christian seminary, that sent missionaries to many places, and particularly missionaries to the Middle East.
At the University of Hartford, the Maurice Greenberg Center for Judaic Studies curriculum has included formal programs in Judaism, Christianity, the Bible, and Middle Eastern religion and culture. The Greenberg Center has also provided informal educational and outreach programs, including a lecture series, which brings prominent religious figures to the Hartford community. The Henry Luce Forum in Abrahamic Religions brought together these 2 institutions in a multi-year project, studying Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as they interact in modern American society.
They did an experiment with us. They said, let's see if you can do something to bring Jews, Christians, and Muslims together.
Initial efforts in the greater Hartford, Connecticut area brought members of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities together for a series of workshops, lectures, and functions.
What I noticed was, although they would come together for that one night, for that one event, there was never a sustained discussion. There was never an ability to go beyond, the 5 minutes of clip discussion that you had with somebody. And even when we would share, for example, a meal together, it was that one moment we'd share a meal with somebody, and it was gone. I realized in order to see whether this experiment that we were doing, this trialogue, was possible, we had to bring together people in a sustained environment of not a day, and not even a week, but a few weeks. And to see if people live together, spend nearly 24 hours together every day, And what we hit upon was the idea of taking people out of the United States into a new environment that would spark their discussions on who they are as Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
Possible locations for the tour were studied. Turkey, Egypt, Israel, and even Iraq were considered. All had some degree of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim coexistence currently or historically. Egypt, Israel, and Iraq were removed from consideration due to unrest or political instability. Turkey was still recovering from devastating earthquakes. Ultimately, Morocco was chosen.
Morocco was one of those unique places that still has Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together in a relationship that had been in existence for over 1,000 years.
The idea of a study tour to a foreign country caught the interest of other institutions beyond the Hartford area, such as Auburn Seminary in New York City.
Auburn Seminary has been involved for the last 15 years in various kinds of study travel seminars to different parts of the globe. So that's the background out of which we became interested in this trip. And we had done a lot of things involving particularly the Jewish and Christian communities, not only in New York City but outside. And I became increasingly interested that we expand that scope.
In the Midwest, the University of Nebraska at Omaha is the home of the Center for Afghanistan Studies. Years of experience in Central Asia had shown firsthand the need for multi-religious dialogue.
I thought, wow, this really fits in very closely with some of the things that I've been working on the last couple of decades with Afghanistan and Tajikistan.
The Morocco of today has been greatly influenced by its location and rich history. The geographic crossroads of Africa, Europe, and the Mediterranean, Morocco has been visited, colonized, and invaded by many civilizations over the past 3,000 years. The Phoenicians built coastal trading posts. Ruins are visible today. Carthage and then Rome established colonies. The remains of Volubilis, a prominent first-century Roman city, still stand. The exact arrival of Jews in Morocco is not positively known. One possibility is that Hebrew merchants visited parts of southern Morocco during the times of David and Solomon. Historians have other theories as well.
According to some traditions that cannot be verified with hard evidence, there existed some communities from more or less the time of the destruction of the first Jewish temple and the exile of the tribes of Israel and Judea around the 6th century BC.
The Christian presence in Morocco was never large, but those that came probably arrived during the Roman and Byzantine periods. However they came, Jewish and Christian communities were most likely well established by the 7th century. Another event took place, one that would change Morocco forever. In the late 7th century, the Muslim followers of Muhammad invaded North Africa, including Morocco. The indigenous Berber people were conquered or converted to the new religion, along with the Arab language and culture. Jews were able to integrate well into many areas of Morocco. Muslims accepted them as true believers of the same God. In many communities, Jews were the only merchants and craftsmen, and as such crucial for commerce. In the early 8th century, Arab Muslims and Berber tribesmen invaded Spain. They were called Moors, probably a derivative of Mauritania, the Roman name for what is now Morocco and Algeria. Under Islamic rule, Muslims, Jews, and Christians coexisted in Spain for several hundred years, usually peacefully. During this period, sometimes called the Golden Age of Spain, Moorish culture developed to a high degree. One of its characteristics was a remarkable architectural style that embraced the horseshoe arches so prevalent in Morocco today. By the 15th century, the Christian kingdoms had regained control of Spain, and a new and formidable threat faced both Muslims and Jews: the Spanish Inquisition.
The Muslims had been in Spain since approximately the 8th century. The Jews had been in Spain from approximately the 1st century. That means that in 1492, the Jews had been in Spain for nearly 1,500 years, and the Muslims had been there for nearly 1,000 years. They felt that they were a part of Spanish society.
Initially, Jews who were thought to be insincere converts to Christianity were targeted. Muslims eventually suffered the same fate. Suspects were tried, frequently tortured, and imprisoned. Some were executed. Large numbers of Jews and Muslims fled Spain, many settling in the nearest seaports, Morocco.
The Jews and the Muslims come to the shores of Morocco and create a much more vibrant culture that was basically partly European and now partly Middle Eastern or Northern African. Morocco and the history of the Inquisition suddenly galvanized Moroccan history so that the other was now the Christians of Europe, and the Jews and the Muslims really felt a bond in Morocco that they didn't, I think, feel in that last period in Spain. So the Inquisition was very important. Also, what it did was it created a very negative kind of relationship with the Christians, which is still present in modern-day Morocco.
During the 19th and early 20th centuries, European colonialism expanded into North Africa. The competition between France and Spain for control of the region, especially Morocco, escalated. The crisis culminated in 1912, when Morocco became a French protectorate. For the first time in Morocco's long history, the entire country was under the control of a foreign power. General Louis Lyautey was the first administrator. The Arabic-speaking general sought to modernize Morocco while maintaining the history and culture of the country. The ruling sultan retained his seat, but was answerable to General Lyautey. After 44 years of French control, Morocco was granted independence in 1956. The reigning sultan was instated as king. Since 1999, Morocco's third king since independence, Mohammed VI, has worn the crown, just like his father and grandfather did before him. The government is a hereditary constitutional monarchy. The king is the head of state, and the crown is passed on through family lines.
The current king of Morocco is a successor to a line that begins in the mid-17th century, just a few decades after the arrival of the Mayflower to this continent.
Today's Morocco is the opposite of the United States in several important ways. A king whose family has been in power for centuries rules it. The government and organized religion have very close ties. Freedom to practice other beliefs is openly proclaimed, but other faiths constitute less than 2% of the population. Christians are an extreme minority. On the buses the group would know so well during the study tour, they viewed the Moroccan landscape while learning about the religions and practices of each other's faiths. Fez was founded in the year 808 and is one of the oldest cities in Morocco. Nestled at the edge of the Middle Atlas Mountains, it has been a great intellectual and spiritual center for many centuries. Famous throughout the Muslim world as a center of Quranic study, the city is home to the Qaraween Islamic University, thought to be the oldest in the world. It is near here that the most famous medieval Jewish philosopher of all time, Maimonides, lived and perhaps studied. His theology and philosophy are still studied at seminaries and universities all over the world. Fez was a common destination for Muslims and Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition in the late 15th century. Many came from a part of southern Spain known as Andalusia. The Andalusian influence is evident today in Moorish architecture and a distinctive type of music. The Medina, or Old Muslim Quarter, looks much as it did centuries ago. Both residential and business district to thousands, the exterior walls of the buildings run together and form a fortress-like wall around the entire area. On the interior are miles of walkways, too narrow for vehicles. Just about any manner of goods or service can be found. The Dahan Synagogue was one of several in the heart of a thriving Jewish community that once boasted a population of over 30,000. Since the end of World War II, the Jewish population has steadily decreased. Today, that community is almost non-existent. Many have emigrated to Israel, Europe, or North America. The local rabbi described to the group how he performs only funerals. No weddings, bar mitzvahs, or bat mitzvahs.
When we were in Fez, I got to go to a synagogue and pray on Saturday morning, and there were 15 women in the synagogue and maybe 20, 25 men, when there used to be thousands and thousands.
Fez is the home of one of the Jewish cemeteries found in Morocco. Muslims and Christians join Jews in frequenting the sites of Jewish saints buried there.
Miracles are such an important part of the life of the rank and file Moroccan. So, for example, when you go to visit Morocco and you're told that there are cemeteries where you visit the graves of miracle workers. And the miracle workers, for example, are Jewish graves of saintly rabbis or saintly women. And Moroccans, Muslims, Christians go to the site of these miracle workers in order to have these miracles be performed for them.
I was very moved by the cemetery that we visited in Fez, and to see the contrast between an Ashkenazic cemetery, which I'm used to, and this being a Moroccan Jewish cemetery. And certainly the great reverence that they had and still have for their rabbis is very, very important.
One member of the group had a very personal tie to the cemetery. Her father had been born a Moroccan Jew near Fez and come to the United States when he was quite young. She knew very little of his ties to Morocco, but family members were somewhere in the cemetery.
Being in the cemetery in Fez was the most powerful punctuation. My family is buried there, members of my family, and I didn't know where they were. So I just decided that one of the graves was my cousin, and we said Kaddish. And to say Kaddish with people, Muslims and Christians that had never prayed with Jews before, and to have them witness my journey home was really, really powerful. And I could tell that I was home then.
Visiting a small village in the mid-Atlas Mountains near Fez gave the group a unique opportunity to meet and interact with Moroccans on a much different level than they had to that point.
Those people were nice in an incredibly authentic way. There was an honest and open curiosity about people that didn't live like them, and also this desire to share their culture. I could be part Berber for all I know, and I don't know. The cool thing was that these people were like, well, I don't care what the hell you are, welcome home. That made me feel good.
I think the visit to the Berber village was fascinating. It was a chance to really experience a different kind of culture in a different place that I ever could imagine.
I really was very impressed at the village outside of Fez and the welcome that we received from the family and the people of the village. It was as if they wanted to show their very best to people they didn't know and may never see again, and it was very touching.
Volubilis is the site of a prominent Roman outpost built around the middle of the 1st century. The early Christian presence in Morocco quite possibly arrived through here as Christianity grew in Rome. The city was at its most prestigious and powerful state during the reign of Emperor Caracalla. The remnants of the basilica or market and meeting place indicate the commercial importance of the city. Exquisite mosaics decorated the floors of noblemen's homes. The Romans were never able to conquer the local Berber tribes. As the empire fell, they eventually abandoned Volubilis. Rabat is the capital of Morocco and the seat of government. Morocco is an Islamic state. The government is very closely connected with the Islamic faith. The king has the title Commander of the Faithful, making him a political and religious leader. The Minister of Islamic Affairs told how the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion. His office, however, acts on behalf of the government to strengthen and support only Islam.
I am a political scientist and I study, among other things, religion and politics. And sitting in the Ministry of Religious Affairs and listening to the officials, it really brought that whole concept to to a very concrete level for me. And because what I saw in that environment is both the advantages and the disadvantages of a state-supported religion.
Being a state ordained and established religion doesn't really help you get to the heart of God very much. I've been really struck by how secularized this country is.
It seemed to me that the ministry is willing to support spiritually the Christians and the Jews who exist as minorities in Morocco, but they don't seem to put the money where their mouth is and support the community. They expect the Moroccan Jews, for instance, to receive money from elsewhere for economic support, and that just doesn't happen. And that explains a lot of what's going on today with these religions in Morocco. I saw that these religions, if anything, especially Judaism, they're leaving. The Jews are leaving and go to Israel because that's where the economic support is.
Having seen mosques everywhere they went, the tour group was surprised by a visit to a large Roman Catholic cathedral built during the French Protectorate era. Today it serves a small congregation of primarily foreigners. Since Islam prohibits the use of icons and religious imagery, Muslim members of the group were not accustomed to seeing Christian religious symbols.
One thing I noticed very specific here with the symbolism of God the Father being portrayed as a human being. And I haven't seen that anywhere else. And I would like to know whether it is specific to this church or is it something that God is portrayed as in the form of a human being.
The cathedral was a reminder that Christians make up less than 1% of Morocco's population.
The most poignant moment in this entire trip was one moment when we were in the Roman Catholic Church in Rabat. And one of the senior ministers said, "Now I know what it feels like to be a minority." And here we were sitting in this beautiful cathedral, and it was empty, and probably church services never really fill it. And that one moment gave that person an insight into everything that we were trying to do.
Is really the only English-speaking church. So
throughout the tour, lecturers addressed the participants on a variety of subjects. An American pastor of a Protestant church in Rabat addressed the group. With Christians being in the extreme minority, his congregation is primarily embassy personnel from many countries and denominations.
And there's 25 nations or so represented in that mix. So it's very interesting. They have to get used to my American accent.
He told of his experience as part of the very small Christian presence in Morocco and the reality of practicing Christianity in an Islamic state.
There are secret police who have come to the services to take notes on what's happening. There have been occasions where the police have come in and taken out Moroccans who were in the church and taken them out of the church. There are people who have been taken to the police and questioned because they're being too open about their faith. So these things are all there. So on the one hand, you say, are the Christians exaggerating the attention the government gives them? On the other hand, you have this anecdotal evidence that there is some watching taking place.
Goodness of people and humanity in general just going across.
You find people waving at our bus. I mean, I can't get over the men in the cafes waving at our bus.
Large and small group interactions resulted, encouraging levels of discussion that grew deeper and deeper.
There is supplications, and there is the worship. The supplication is simple. Anybody could participate and ask God, the Creator, for forgiveness, for guidance, for a solution of his problems, for that. That's common. The worship is considered very sacred, and it is the time that the servants get closest to the Creator.
We had extraordinarily rich conversations at many points during the trip. It was probably the most time that we had together in terms of discussion about what we were seeing and hearing, but also what did that mean for us who came from the United States.
Conversations in the bus and at dinner tables have had a great role to play in dispelling some of the misunderstandings. I see a chance for people to come together to focus on their commonalities and to shed away the husk, you can say, of rituals that often we get bogged down in and often fight over. If anything, I think a value can be taken from dialogue, but it needs to have a background. And the background needs to be, when you approach a dialogue or trialogue, you need to understand the other. You need to know where they're coming from, at least have a brief understanding, either may it be their religion or their culture. So you can actually engage in that. If you're clueless, it's a little harder, I think.
Marrakesh was founded in the late 11th century and is one of Morocco's oldest cities. It was the capital of several major Berber dynasties. Today's Marrakesh attracts tourists from all over the world. The blend of modern hotels, restaurants, and cyber cafes with centuries-old architecture and culture are a powerful draw to this ancient city. A short distance to the east lie the high Atlas Mountains. Numerous Berber enclaves exist now as they have for hundreds of years. Small villages of red clay buildings dot the mountainsides, many accessible only by foot. Tour group members were struck by the hospitality of Moroccans they encountered.
The hospitality of the people here, that's a biblical mandate to welcome strangers, and we've been real strangers to the folks we've met. And wherever we've gone, people have been generous with their eyes and their smiles, and sometimes even opening their homes. And their meadows. Yesterday, people let us sit in their meadow and served us tea and bread. It was wonderful.
I was invited to the home of an Arab taxi driver. We were not able to communicate in English. I was entertained by him. I had lunch with him. That kind of experience is totally unpredictable and unimaginable, but it is probably the experience that I will carry home with me in terms of connecting on a human level.
We're in a country that has a level of poverty that the U.S. probably will never see. And it strikes me as just fascinating that other people that who I obviously see are poor, when I sit down and talk with them, there is no hostility. There's no, stupid American go to hell, there's none of that. There's, let's talk. It seems like personal connection is more important than finances on some levels. And I just found that amazing.
Americans frequently associate Casablanca with the famous World War II movie of the same name. To Moroccans, the immense Hassan II Mosque is the trademark symbol of their country's largest city. Built under the direction of King Hassan II, father of the present king, the structure is an engineering marvel. At over 650 feet, the minaret is the tallest in the world. It can accommodate 25,000 worshippers inside and an additional 80,000 in the surrounding courtyards. The mosque is symbolic in several ways. Its location proclaims how far north and west the Dar al-Islam, or Land of Islam, stretches. It is the geographic crossroads of African, European, Mediterranean, and Arab civilizations. all of which have influenced Morocco's culture. Perhaps most importantly, it is an unmistakable statement of the status Islam holds in Morocco. In sharp contrast with the grandeur of the Hassan II Mosque is a small museum, also located in Casablanca. It chronicles the nearly 15 centuries of Jewish presence in Morocco.
I think the piece that touched me the most was the green velvet wedding dress, and to wonder if I had stayed here, would I have gotten married in that dress?
Paintings, photos, and numerous artifacts testify to the Jewish culture that developed and thrived here side by side with the Muslim population. The museum is also a reminder of how the once significant Jewish population has dramatically dwindled since World War II. With the establishment of Israel in 1948, large numbers of Moroccan Jews emigrated there, seeking better economic and religious conditions. Smaller numbers also went to Europe and North America. Today, only a few thousand Jews remain in Morocco.
It's really strange to be in a museum of people that are alive, and it's hard to come to terms with the fact that most of the Jews have left.
An Islamic state is a utopian state, actually, in the theory of the word, or the phrase. It is a place where people live in harmony and are taken care of, regardless of religion. If you're Jewish or Christian in an Islamic state, you would have protection under the government and support.
Time in Morocco was drawing to a close. The foreign location and extended time spent with people of different faiths left their mark on the group.
In the 4 cities we've visited, I've been to perhaps 3 mosques in each city and prayed at our normal, time for prayer in those mosques, and that's just been a great experience.
People now are learning not just about the other faith traditions, not just about their own faith tradition, but also about Morocco and how the 3 religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, relate to contemporary Morocco.
Seeing, kids running, out and like waving and shaking hands and just wanting to talk. I mean, I can walk down the street right now and there'll be 10 people who come up to me and be like, "What's up?" That, to me, that's divine.
Many people throughout the world think that we're interested in them only because of our own specific national interests, our own commercial interests. They don't see a genuine expression of curiosity and interest in them as people. And the more we have this people-to-people, person-to-person citizen diplomacy, the more we're going to help to eradicate that particular feeling about Americans.
I think it's been valuable for many of us as individuals just to have the opportunity to get to know people of different faiths in a way that we usually don't have an opportunity to in our ordinary lives.
So the bonding that took place during that very short period of time to create your own mini global village out of this tour, and to have that work in itself was one of the great miracles. We talk about the miracles that occurred on this. This is one of the great miracles, that people were able to find that sense of bonding together in this environment that we created.
Islam is my religion and my way of life. But this trip has been an open door for me to walk through and to see other traditions and experience the spirituality within them.
I've been a more public Jew here than I usually am. I've been able to explain my tradition, and I probably, to my absolute amazement, am going to synagogue when I return. Yes, and that's been interesting, how it's reinforced who I am and being proud of the cultural connections I have in my life.
We had a very small Jewish service when we were up in the mountains above Marrakesh, and we climbed a little bit up into the mountain. And there were Jews, there were Christians, and there were Muslims, and we all joined together in this spontaneous service in welcoming the Sabbath. We didn't have bread for the usual blessing, the challah, which we usually have on the Sabbath. And one of the young women suggested, like a challah is braided, we all put our arms into the center, and we braided our arms and said the prayer we usually said over the challah. And I get teary thinking about it. There was a warmth there with the three religions, and everyone was so equally enthralled by it. It was very, very special.
Morocco's history shows undeniably that people of different faiths can peacefully coexist and thrive. It also shows that when one religion dominates and controls the others, or secular forces exert their influence, religious freedom can be undermined. The end of the tour brought the realization to many that the best place to foster and advance multi-religious dialogue is the United States. But there is work to be done.
The Muslims worship here, the Jews, what's left of them, worship here, the Christians feel a little persecuted about things. And I had hoped that some people would be risking prayer together in a blended way. And it's only happening in our group, which is great. And, you know, I have a feeling that we're like the canaries of a new movement, the people who came on this trip.
People tend to think of the United States predominantly as a Christian country. It is. But there are a lot of others from all other religions that practice very freely and very openly in our country and do very, very well here. And it's important to communicate that.
There's a lot of anti-Western feeling in various parts of the world, but for those who take a good hard look, it's not all perfect over here in Eden, but it is the case that different groups can, by law, exist. They are not forced to hide themselves, to be in private. They can be open, they can be public, they can talk about their beliefs, they can make sure that their children are allowed to practice those beliefs in ways that are appropriate and fit into a Western cultural context. So I think the U.S. can be a model.
The Moroccan Minister of Religious Affairs said, "When are you going to bring another group here?" You opened our eyes that it was possible for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, the first time they had ever heard of such a thing in Morocco, that Jews, Christians, and Muslims not only traveled together, but they visited each other's sites.
Back in the United States, a number of the Moroccan study tour participants have stayed in contact with each other. Many have initiated or been involved in various multi-religious efforts. One tour veteran worked at modifying a Hartford area private school's chapel. The current students are from many faith backgrounds, but the chapel reflected the school's Protestant lineage.
The chapel service is an integral part of student life, so they want experience for the students that they can share.
The traditional benches were replaced with chairs that could be moved to open up the space for different styles of worship. Banners representing various religions were hung from the rafters of the chapel.
It's a bit of a different situation in a private school where a chapel can be part of the student life. In a public school, you don't have such things. It's not legal. However, public schools, I think, can learn from this example by at least understanding the need for such a space, that it is possible to provide a space that may be neutral to students.
World events would soon seriously challenge multi-religious dialogue efforts. In communities across the country, interreligious prayer services, such as this one in Hartford, Connecticut, brought together members of many faiths.
These atrocities committed against our nation and its people, and indeed against all people of goodwill, have at their root a total disrespect for human life.
Prayers for the victims and condemnation of the violence committed on September 11, 2001 were almost universal themes.
And that we may learn to join hands with fellow Americans condemning these senseless acts of terror. O merciful God.
As the identities of the hijackers became known, anger was increasingly focused at the Muslim population in general.
It was the people who went on this trip, who in their own communities were the ones that organized the ecumenical prayer services. What's very interesting, these are the same people who organized letter writing campaigns to newspapers, to radio, to TV, to try to get the message out about who should be blamed and who should not be blamed.
If the United States is to be a successful model for the rest of the world, there are lessons that must be learned. In Omaha, Nebraska, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim groups had initiated functions to bring their people together. In the spring of 2002, they held a tri-faith picnic. The tense Israeli-Palestinian situation made the planners question the wisdom of having the event.
We looked at a picnic like this and we asked ourselves, both the Islamic community and the Jewish community, if this is the right time to rejoice and be happy. Because look around you, you find happiness and joy and kids playing, and just the heart was so heavy with the casualties on both sides.
But it was important for us to come together even at the time of the bad times so we can unite together in our lives over here. We cannot make these events over there bring us down over here.
Even though there are significant differences and even though there is significant pain in the world that arises out of those differences religiously and politically, in particular in the Middle East, we are here together trying to understand one another, seeking out one another.
There was no disagreement that events such as the picnic would be nearly impossible to hold in the Middle East.
There's too much history there, there's too much blood there, there's too many graves that are still fresh, and I think that's one of the reasons that people cannot disengage themselves from history, and they are so stuck and so paralyzed in the history instead of looking forward for the future.
In this country we tend to overlook a lot of the differences we have. So, you know, praise God, I mean, this is a great land, and you know, people tend to mix with each other much easier than they would over there.
By being together in fellowship and making friends around the tables, we're able to understand one another on a more human level and thus better understand our differences as well as our similarities.
If you have people who are willing to sit down and share a meal and share the neighborhood and share the streets and share the games as equals and as neighbors, then you always would have that peace.
A small seed of hope is what we're looking for, knowing that we can only do our part, and that might be limited, but in God's arena, all things are possible.
There's enough evil in the world. It's definitely being perpetuated at this moment, and I think acts of goodness and caring and compassion can add to the other side of the balance.
We pride ourselves in our religious diversity, yet back when our Constitution was created, religious diversity basically meant Heinz 57 varieties of Protestants. We're way beyond that.
In reality, religions are brothers of each other, and they should cooperate. Of course, everybody has to maintain their own identity and carry on their own practices, but they also should have a room for accepting the others and not forcing their own opinions and ideas on the others.
This country is a grand experiment of the past 250 years, an experiment that we don't know what the end of this experiment will be. But what we all agree is that the principles upon which this country is based, and which is the basis of this experiment, are principles which are the highest ideals that human beings have ever thought of. And we have to hope that we will survive both the internal strife and the external.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Gilbert M. and Martha H. Hitchcock Foundation. Additional support was provided by the Nebraska Humanities Council.